So if you've logged on to glowscript.org in the last few days, you've probably noticed that you're getting a message here that you can update to GlowScript 2.7. This is a new edition of GlowScript. It came out at the end of January 2018, and 2.7 introduces some new options for the graphs that you create in GlowScript. So all the previous syntax that you've been using in 2.6 still works. It just adds some new options. One of the options that you now have is whether you want to use the previous version of the graphing function that runs faster, or whether you want to use the new, fancier version of the graphing function that might run slower. For most applications, you probably won't notice a difference in speed, but if you're doing any sort of performance computing, or if your students are working on any complicated, long calculations, you'll probably notice a difference. But for most applications, you might not notice a difference. So for right now, we're going to go with fast equals true, so that we're using the previous version, and then we'll change it to false in just a minute to look at what the new features are. But under fast equals true or fast equals false, you now have a new option in GCurve. So when you want to make a graph in VPython, you've got three options. You've got dots, curves, or bars. I tend to stick with the curve option because we tend to view graphs as connected, as lines connecting our data points. And as long as you've got your data points close enough together, then you have a nice smooth curve. Of course, pedagogically, it would be nice to have a curve and a set of dots on the screen so that students can get an idea of where that curve is coming from and where the jagged edges are coming from. Previously, if you wanted to do that, you had to create a GCurve and GDots. No more. Now, when you call the GCurve function, you can add in this markers option, and if you set it equal to true, it will add markers to your graph. So here I've created a simple while loop to graph this function, sine of exponential of cosine of x. It looks nice and pretty. I'm going to hit Control-2 to run. And you notice you get the same type of animation you had before. The graphing utility hasn't really changed. You still get the cursor here where you can look at the data points. But what's changed in this view is that in addition to having the GCurve, in addition to having these lines, you also now get these markers. So you can kind of follow along here and look at where your data points actually are. So that's a neat feature. I'm very happy to have that. Let's take a look now at what happens if you set this fast equal to false. The fast might not be the best name for it in my mind. I might call it, interactive equals true instead of fast equals false. But if you're concerned with performance, and obviously you're thinking in terms of the fast variable here. But if you set fast equal false, you get a much fancier graph. Let's hit Control-2 and see what happens. So you can already see the window looks a little bit different. You still get the same graph functionally, so it's still looking the same. Again, it's giving you the markers and the curve. But if you hover over it, you look up here and you've got all these nice new options. Let's take a look at all of these options. Firstly, you can download the plot as a PNG. This is nice because it saves a few steps compared to taking a screenshot and cropping it and pasting it into wherever you want it to go. You just click on this link and you save your PNG file directly to your computer. Very nice, very convenient, very happy with that. There's a save icon where you can save and edit this on Plotly. So this is the Python library that this new features are based on. So here you can do more editing with it. I am not as familiar with Plotly, but if you've used Plotly before, this will seem very familiar. If you've not used Plotly before, this is a good opportunity to learn. So I'm going to learn a little bit more about this off camera, probably add in a tutorial about how to use this interface to work with your data. There are also new zooming options. So previously on the 2.6 version and on now the fast version, you couldn't zoom in on the graph. You were stuck with whatever view was created. Now you have several options for how to zoom in. First, you can use the zoom select feature here. You're probably familiar with this type of option from, say, the Pasco software, where if you really want to zoom in on this peak, you just click and drag around the section that you want to see. You'll also notice I can focus strictly on going horizontally or strictly going vertically, although now I've broken that. There we go. I can strictly go horizontally, or I can go strictly vertically. There we go. So I can fine-tune my view before I save it as a PNG. You can also zoom in and out with the zoom buttons here. So you can zoom in with this, zoom out with this. As usual, with graphing utilities, this keeps the center the same, I think it looks like. But if you end up with a zoom factor that you don't like, or you get lost in some blank corner, it's pretty straightforward to reset. You've got a couple options there. You can either auto scale and get the entire graph in view, or you can reset the axes. Now, right now for this code, those are doing the same function. They're not having any different output because I have the graph set to auto scale automatically. So if your axes were originally not auto scaled, this will revert them to their original format. Another thing you can do that you couldn't do before is pan. So if you click on the pan button here, you can now move the graph around, so you can get an idea of where your data is going or see different regions of the graph. You can also move your individual axes by clicking on the x-axis here and dragging, or you can click on the y-axis here and drag. The next two buttons we'll look at are the data selection buttons. So these allow you to select and highlight specific data points. So notice the only data points showing up now are the ones inside the rectangle that I'm creating there. There's also a lasso select if you wanted to sweep along the curve. Particularly useful, for example, if you've got multiple graphs up and you only want to get a portion of the graphing window there. All right, I want to get out of the selection. Okay, so you can click on auto scale or reset axes and get rid of that selection, so that's nice. Another thing you can do now, you notice as I've been moving along here that it's showing me the exact data points on the GCurve. Previously, you had to move the cursor around and try to hover in on a data point. Now this little display here snaps to the nearest data point. If you have multiple data sets, you can change it to have showing you all the data points that you're near, or just having the closest data point that you're near to. So you're seeing two in this view because technically these are two data sets, one for the dots and one for the lines. So if you want to simplify that, you just click on the single marker here and you'll just get the one mark on the graph. There is one other button on here. I will admit I have not figured out what it does. Toggle spike lines. I'm still not sure what that feature is. Let me see if it comes up in the sample program that they provide. So on the documentation, there's this neat sample program that runs that shows you the GCurve, the G dots, and the bars. Is that G bars? I never use the bars. Let's see what happens if I change this. No, it's not changing anything there. Okay, I'm going to keep investigating, find out what the toggle spike lines does. Or if you know, let me know in the comments below or tweet me at Let's Code Physics. Let's see, let's come back to our code here because I want to show you the one problem that I have run into. So I like a lot of things about this new version. Overall, I give this version 2 thumbs up. I like the GCurve with the markers. I really like being able to manipulate the graph view. You know, it makes GlowScript's graphing capabilities competitive with other graphing utilities. I also like the fact that there's a bit of redundancy in the graphing controls. There are lots of different ways to do the same thing. There is one thing that I have found that causes a problem. And, well, actually, let's not uncomment that yet. I want to show you what happens if you try to interact with the graph while it is running. So let's hit Control 2. And I'm going to zoom in while the graph is running. So you notice I clicked right away on the graph to try to zoom in. Maybe I'm an eager undergraduate wanting to zoom in on a set of data. And you notice that the graph pauses. That is nice. That is a nice feature that the graph pauses to let me manipulate it. But then when I release, watch this, the graph does not resume. So there's a bug here where the graph does not continue running. And I say the graph doesn't continue running because I found out that the code itself does still run. So if I come back over here, let's add in an animation window. And let's just have a sphere move along the x-axis here. When I hit Control 2, again, I'm going to try to interact with the graph. All right, so I've frozen the graph, but the animation continues. Let's make this maybe 2 pi so it runs twice as long. Yeah, it's a very specific bug, but it's the type of thing that my students just might try to do. See how the ball continues to move? Meanwhile, the graph does not continue to generate more data points. I have been on the Google form for this, and Dr. Bruce Sherwood has assured me that that they're aware of this and that they're working on it. So we should expect a fix for this soon, I hope. Again, it's a very specific bug. It doesn't actually impact the performance. It's just something you want to be aware of. Maybe you give your students a little bit of instructions. Don't interact with the graph until it is finished forming. So to recap, GlowScript 2.7 has some nice new features for the graph if you access it with the fast equals false option on the graph function. I like the markers added to the GCurve. I think that's very helpful. I like that we finally get to manipulate the view of the graph. I think that's amazing. What I would love to see after this would be the ability to toggle the axes between a log scale and a linear scale. Currently, you have to select in the code whether you're creating a log plot or a linear plot, and sometimes you don't know which you would rather have until you create the graph. So I would love to have an extra toggle up here to switch these axes between linear and logarithmic. But like I said, other than that one wish and the one little bug that I found, I really like these new features. I'm going to be recommending them to my students, and I encourage you to get to know them and pass them along to your students as well. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye-bye.